Can I share a quick story on that? So this is
Yes,
years ago.
absolutely.
It's a little personal. There's years ago, I was having a tough time, and my wife and I were in the doctor, and he could tell that I was not going well, but he was going through the questions. He had his computer in there, was typing all the stuff, and he asked me a question, and I paused and I answered it in a way that he did this thing where he sat back, pushed his computer away, and just looked at me. And I'll forever be grateful to that doctor and forever be loyal to them because of that moment, right? That moment where he said, look, this person needs a face to reflect to, needs somebody to understand, and I'm going to sit back and do that. That's that's essentially what an advisor does in a nutshell, right? It's not the other things. That's the piece that can't be replicated.
What if the real reason advisory firms struggle to scale isn't growth, but what happens after the client says yes? Today, I'm joined by Ryan George, CMO at Docupace, to talk about the unsung back office heroes who keep firms running and how agentic AI is changing their world. We unpack the difference between automation and intelligent automation, why most in one beats all in one, and why the smartest first step into AI isn't back office at all. If you think AI is just a content generator, this conversation might change your mind. Let's dive right in. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So this is an extension, really, of the interview that we did, the long form blog article. I like to point listeners. This is another one in the Digital Kaizen for Financial Advisors series, and that long form article that we did, and I have it up here. So I'm trying to make eye contact, but I'm looking at this giant screen. It says Back Office Heroes and Agentic AI, a conversation with Ryan George. This is a really good article. I would encourage listeners to go to LinkedIn and find it there, and they'll see a deep dive. But I wanted to kind of expand on what you talked about in that and really just start out of the gate with what's the hidden cost when operations teams feel invisible?
I think there's an emotional side, and there's the side of just isn't about the clients, it's about the team. And so when you feel invisible, you feel like the work is just there to get done and not done in the right way. And so I think that's one of the key challenges that you can often face when you're in the back office. What I call back office heroes is you feel like the work you do doesn't matter to the group. It's not the focus of the organization or focus of the business. And that's never where you want to be. You don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight, but you want to feel like you can go home, get in your car, and feel like you've contributed to the overall success of the organization.
What does burnout look like for a back office hero?
Grumpy. So I would say burnout is generally they get the work done. I don't think many people understand that there's a timeline. So work that gets in has to be processed within that day. So, when 3 o'clock Central Time comes or 4 o'clock Eastern comes, that work needs to be put in. And so I think it's a quality of work can go down, teamwork can go down, and then I call it like rubber stamping, meaning like you're doing the baseline work, not necessarily doing a value added work.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask you about now Docupace. You actually say in the article, don't start with Docupace, and that's a bold statement there. If back office chaos is the real growth bottleneck, why shouldn't advisors start there?
I think there's a couple of things. One, back office is hard. Getting your operation really streamlined and getting your operations to be what I call operationally awesome is not an easy task. And so oftentimes you can find things that like getting the initial client experience set up well. Like we have a product line called Personalized FP that really can streamline the digital intake of a client. That's a much easier implementation than trying to implement Docupace. And so I think focusing on those where there's friction, but also can be solved relatively easily is often the better place. Because then when you get to solve the hard part, so, all of the operational workflows and the complexity there, you're starting from a better space.
That makes sense. So I'm a Precise FP user, and for me as a small individual firm, solo entrepreneur, that's a great fix for me. It's changed the way my practice has been. Now the other companies, Docupace and the ones that you represent, those kind of go up the chain as far as size, like all the way up to enterprise level. For somebody who's not familiar with the different ways that your company structured, could you share a little bit about that for us?
Sure. So Docupace has been acquisitive over time. So we're a 24-year-old company. In 2020, the new leadership team came in, including myself, our CEO, David Knock. And so we've been looking to build out our capabilities. So we bought a company called Giacomo in 2021 that does advisor compensation management, as well as compliance and surveillance. We also acquired Precisive P, which is, like you said, the client data gathering and like client survey and intake form. It's really I would say not necessarily a client engagement tool, but it's a client it's a way to get all the information you need from the client so that you can feed it into your financial plan, but also it connects the different systems together so you can send their information into eMoney or send their information to an estate planning tool like Asset Map or Holistic Plan or Income Lab. So that's Precisive P. Then last year, around this time last year, we announced the acquisition of Hubly. So Hubly is workflows that sit on top of your CRM. So think of it as your wealth management operating system. It's also, I would say, specifically for enterprise-minded firms who want to behave like a big boy, but yet necessarily have a big payroll. And that's where you can get it layers on the layer on top of your Wealthbox or Redtail CRM. And really, it's the hub that the name is well suited. It's a hub that sort of routes all the work within the firm. Then at the grandest scale is the Docupace platform. So Docupace, like I said, has been around for 24 years. We started as a document management workflow storage. And then we've worked into digital account opening. We connect with all the major custodians, but that's for, I would say, firms that are opening up 500 or more accounts a year, have a distributed advisor base in multiple places where they need a system to keep them connected. That's where Docupace sits. So that's much more of an enterprise tool.
I love that. That gives, there's a little bit of something for everybody, right? The precise one tool for the smaller guys, and then you've got the middle tool there, and then you've got ultimately the enterprise version there. I heard things like even compliance, taking care of that piece of it as you go up the stream there. I love that. I love that. Now I'm going to pivot just a little bit and talk about agentic AI. That's what we mentioned in this article. One of the things we focused on. What's the worst case scenario if firms deploy agentic AI without a human in the loop safeguards?
I think the risk could be that they have unchecked risk at scale. When I say that, I mean that the mistakes can be made and increase your risk without ever having a human approve it. So, for instance, you could have a challenge in missing a supervisory flag on trading an account. If automation trades that 1 million times because you have 10 million accounts, your risk is exponentially greater. So I think that's where the human in the loop piece is interesting. And I think we're going to be here for a while. I don't think, especially financial services firms, are going to be fully comfortable without a human in the loop for some time. I just think we'll see all sorts of innovation, and you're seeing it every day. There's a new tool coming out. But I think you're still just going to see the need for humans. And I think that's probably a safer bet.
I like the idea of that we're going to be here for a while, right? I don't think any of this is going away. In fact, if anything, we pull up our news in the morning and we see, just another. It's a force multiplier. We see things rapidly expanding in the AI space, and so I like that take on it.
Part of it to keep in mind too, Chris, is this space is an advice and analysis and rationale perspective space, right? So it's not always rules-based. It's not always black and white. A client that looks like me could need X plan or Y plan. So I don't think it's like the human side is going to be here. Like I said, we'll be here for a while. It also is a critical piece of having that human connection. It's not just about ones and zeros and trades and automation. It's about can you bond with the person who's delivering the advice to you?
I love that. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they remind, advisors, we tend to be analytics. We focus on the numbers, but one of the things the AI is really good at is bringing up the things that you just mentioned, advice analysis. One person might have a solve that looks like X. One person might have a solve for Y. There's a lot of customization there. And that's that human factor and keeping it in the mix there. I love that.
Can I share a quick story on that? So, this is years
absolutely.
ago. It's a little personal. There's years ago, I was having a tough time, and my wife and I were in the doctor, and he could tell that I was not going well, but he was going through the questions. He had his computer in there, was typing all the stuff, and he asked me a question, and I paused, and I answered it in a way that he did this thing where he sat back, pushed his computer away, and just looked at me, and I'll forever be grateful to that doctor, and forever be loyal to them because of that moment, right? That moment where he said, look, this person needs a face to reflect to, needs somebody to understand, and I'm going to sit back and do that. That's essentially what an advisor does in a nutshell, right? It's not the other things. That's the piece that can't be replicated.
For sure, 100%. I love that story. That's. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I love that. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about data moats. Does transaction volume become a competitive moat in intelligent automation?
I think it does. I also think somebody like Docupace, where you've got sort of two schools of thought coming into AI. There's the AI native firms that have built sort of slick, nimble technologies, which are modern based with AI, which I think is great. Right now, they've really just gotten to the point solution phase where they're like Zox. I know you spoke with Zox. Zox is a great tool. Jump is a great tool. Those tools are awesome in what they do, and we think highly of them. But there's something that Docubase has is we have 24 years of data that can not only take the transaction volume that we're seeing on a daily basis or weekly basis, but also compare that with 24 years of that and see. And so when we train the different models on our side, I think we have much more in-depth review, also tying it to compare different things over time. So like when ad hoc scenarios happen that could be outliers, we can compare to see if that may happen. Has that happened in the past?
That's important. It's not just starting in a vacuum there. You've got 24 years of data to go back and look at things that have worked, things that have broken, and then start from fresh there, right? I think that's huge.
On the AI side, I think where that really comes in is it allows us, which we're in the process of doing, it allows us to build what we call like self-healing workflows. There's self-healing items that can leverage that lengthy amount of deep data in order to correct itself so that it sees something that's wrong and based on what the data is showing. And I think that's different than if you have a smaller set of data to pull from.
I love the term self-healing workflow. The thing I'm doing with digital Kaizen, I use like a controller document. And one of the things that I'm doing is that there's a content index that's looking for judgment decisions. And when I make exceptions, right? And so it's looking for those kind of things. But the idea of self-healing workflow, I love that. That's really a great concept there. Or go ahead.
No, you mentioned it. The exception is, I was speaking at a conference last week at FSI, and the gist of it is this is an exception-laden business. This is how things work. And so that's where, again, going back to the human in the loop phase, the human needs to be making the exception, not automation.
That is 100%. Even when you train people, you're like, this is the way you do it, except for if it's this custodian and it's on this day, blue moon on the fourth. There's always exceptions for sure. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about the AI note takers, because I know we mentioned some of them that I've interviewed, and then kind of how they're different there. But what signals tell an advisor they're ready to move from a note taker to workflow automation?
I think it's not an and or, it's a yes. And so I think where you find yourself wanting to getting comfortable with the note takers, but also something like a Jump or a Zox is just going to take what you're saying. And so you need to learn, advisors will need to shift how they converse with their clients in order to get the proper information to then it into flow. And I think once you do that point, once you know that you're catching all the T's and dotting all the I's, I think then you can start to do more automation of letting that information without being checked at the beginning flow through an automated system.
I love that. The idea of shaping what you're saying to catch the things that you're trying to do, and then turning around and using those for workflows, or actually it's a different way to look at it.
Yeah, it's a different conversation that I think you may have, knowing that it's being recorded and that recording is being used in a specific way.
Absolutely. So
it's no different than if I'm giving you think of it as giving a testimony, like in a deposition. You're trained to ask and answer questions in a certain way. I think a conversation would be the same way, is that you don't want to confuse the automation with information that may be irrelevant or inaccurate.
I like that. I wrote a piece about signal curation, and I was using ambient, always on recording devices. Right now, this is in my personal life, not in my business life. My business life, I've got Fireflies running, different deal. But what I found over that experiment was that it was picking up a lot of garbage, right? Television, podcasts that I was listening to. So I like the idea of this kind of expanding on it, of signal curation, kind of being conscious about what you're putting into the system, and garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, that's definitely still as relevant as it ever within an AI world.
Let's talk about the bigger vision here. In 5 years, what will a fully agentic back office look like that doesn't exist today?
It's hard to say with things moving so fast. I think one, it will be less expensive. It will be less expensive because while there's a human in the loop, there will likely be less need for the same number of humans. So think of it as if I'm a broker dealer, I would likely shift some of my operations resources towards practice management and business growth resources, right? So that would be a shift that you'll see. I think automation will help catch and train things faster. So for instance, if you have somebody who's in the field that's often submitting material like a new account application or packet forms bundle that is incorrect, you can automatically trigger training and corrections for them so that they can learn about their mistakes at a real-time basis. I think that's another one. I also think the idea that the biggest thing I think changed for the industry is that assets are going to be more portable. And so it'll be like you can't send them to a custodian and they close and lock the door and the custodian keep them for 20 years. I think that's not the way the world will be working in the future. And so I think all of that means there's more movement, there's more choice, but hopefully there's more democratization of advice that advisors have the ability to serve more people and even serve people at a lower asset level, but still do it effectively without it damaging the margin of their business.
I love that. Yeah, no, I agree. You gave the idea of less expensive, the idea of the training, and when mistakes are made, that becomes real time training opportunities, right? That is something that could happen there. And then the assets being made more portable. We've seen that there's kind of a shift to that where it used to be that somebody would get locked to they're sticky to the advisor. They don't want to move the assets, but now things are so modular that it's easier for people to move. Ultimately, that gives those clients more choices, and what you called the democratization of choice there. That's a good thing, and I see that in that direction as well.
Can I just mention a downside of that is I think it's going to be common and not too long from now for one person to have multiple advisors. And so how those advisors interplay with each other, I think will be rather interesting. Like my parents could pass away and their advisor could continue to advise their money, but yet I become the client. Like those things I think are rather interesting as we'll go through this demographic shift. We'll go through all these things that are going to be changing.
That is a good one or you said a kind of a one to keep on our radar as far as negative to an advisor, sort of, right? I'm horrible when it comes to that. Like I'm good if I don't wear that hat, like if it's an estate planning attorney or a CPA I'll bring in an expert. But if it's another financial advisor, it's a bit of a rub, right? I'm like, well, you're giving me discretion on here. But you're absolutely right. I mean, as we see all of this, there's going to be those situations where it's like trust specialists and estate planning, where maybe the multi-generational, they keep the former advisor and that sort of stuff. So those cases are out there, and we got to not let our ego get in the way, right? We want to do the best thing for our clients, and so that is an important thing to mention.
One simple thing that I would definitely watch out for is there could be accumulation focused advisors and decumulation focused advisors that have very different perspectives and views of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it depends where you get the client in their life, right? What life-changing events are happening and where you are as far as your style as an advisor. Let's talk about in the article. You talk about most in one beats all in one. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So in general, and my boss came up with this term, and I think it's an accurate term because I think you've got across the spectrum, you've got a bunch of what I would say point solutions that do one or two things. They're important, but if you really try to streamline your practice, you're going to end up with 18 of them and maybe use 5 of them well. So that's just too many of one of them. Then there's the idea of it's all in one. I can do everything I need to do within the system. And I think that's giving up sort of best practice or best of breed and allowing you to, while you may be able to fully functionally run your business, it's not necessarily optimized if you're trying to do it all within one tool. Then there's what Docupace tries to be is the most in one, meaning we're not going to handle all of your back office and compliance needs. We're not going to handle all of your operation, but what we'll do is we'll take a big chunk of it. Think of it, we can do the 70, 80% of what's needed. And I think that's where we'll land.
That makes a lot of sense there.
It lowers the amount of that vendors you need to work with, but also lowers like your need to run cyber risks with different cities. So just as the SEC and FINRA put more in risk controls regarding vendors you work with, I think that will makes the life a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And we need help with that. Advisors, we're trying to stay relevant and stay on top of all this cutting edge technology, but we are in one of the most heavily regulated industries out there. And so when we talk about FINRA and the regulators and that kind of stuff, making sure that we're operating in those guardrails and any technology tools that make that easier for us that align with that is something that we get on our radar for sure. Let's talk about the difference between automation and intelligence. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So automation is just, I do this, then that, then this, then that sort of thing. So think of it as like a giant decision tree. And that's where we say automation. Intelligent would be more of analysis. Each of those things, instead of being direct yes or no, it's more about, yeah, it's the and in between those yes and no's. And I think that's where tools are starting to get that smart, where they can read for those exceptions and at least flag them, where you've made an exception on this before, where you like to make one now. I think that is the difference of where we think of it as, I'll use a marketing term. I am a marketer at heart, so I'll use the marketing term. Like there's lots of automation. I can send millions of emails with hitting one button, and they send millions of emails over time. That doesn't necessarily solve what I need for. What I need for is to make sure that I'm sending Chris an email with information that's relevant to Chris at this specific time, and that's specific to him. And that's where I think that the intelligent automation comes in.
Love that. The idea when you said sending a million emails, I think it's the brute force attack of marketing, right? Like you get a percentage of people who answer that, but you're not dialing down to who you're trying to get to. And that intelligence that you're talking about, that customization is a huge thing.
To me, and it goes from making noise to delivering value. You could automate lots of noise, but delivering value means, again, I know you, I've done my research in you, I've monitored you, and I'm delivering something that you value, right? That's different than how most practices today.
Love that. I love that. Well, let's talk about some of the features, some of the AI features that are coming to Docupace. What can you share with us about that?
Sure. So we partnered with a company called Palantir. So you may have heard of Palantir. They're one of the sort of larger solutions out there. And the sort of 5 main areas that we're focusing our first efforts are on surveillance. So surveillance and supervision, it's an agent, compensation review agent. Again, really that's more of a double check to make sure that the work's been done correctly. Document extraction is something that's been in the marketplace. Docupace has not had it. I think we're at a place now where uploading a bunch of documents and being able to extract that information is there. One of the things we're really keen on focusing on is non-structured documents. So meaning a 1040 from the IRS is very easy to extract information from. Same thing with a W-2 or what have you, or even a statement that's relatively formatted the same. Handwritten documents, trust paperwork that's 40 pages long and in a narrative format, that's way more difficult to extract that information. So that's where we want to make sure we get that. Also, the account management side, changing an address triggers all sorts of different workflows behind it. And so wanting to make sure that we can get that in a state where specifically if you have a client who's multi-custodian and you want to change the account in one place and then it goes downstream and changes all the others, that's where it will be. And then the last one is advisor onboarding agent. So again, we offer a transition service. It's one of our more popular services here at Docupace. I have a belief that it's still too difficult for an advisor who works with one broker dealer or one RA to move to another one. We want to make it easier to do so, given the freedom of choice and stuff that I talked about before. And so that will be the license checks, the other things that you need in order to move them, have your business be more portable. Think of this: if you were to meet somebody in a state that you weren't licensed, but you thought you were licensed in that state, and you're trying to sell them an insurance product, the system could not only take the application, know that you're not licensed, then go get you registered automatically, bring it back, and then pass the application through, all done through automation. Now, we're a ways from that, but I think that's the hope of where we can go.
It's a huge tool. Before I was an advisor, I did a stint in recruiting for a broker dealer, and that was always, now this was many, many years ago, but the idea of having to read paper and transfer custodians and all of that was always a pain, right? So the idea of something that does some of this automatically, where it's checking for licensing and that kind of stuff as part of the transition, sounds like a powerful tool. So you shared with us advisor onboarding agent, you shared with us document extraction agent there, as far as things that have been rolled out or rolling out or in the process
of being rolled out.
Yeah. Well, right before we're kind of bumping towards the end of the show here, what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to share with listeners today?
I think one thing that I would touch on specifically with the advisor-client relationship is just because you can automate it and you can use AI doesn't mean you should. So thinking about ways to where you can stand out as a human, I think is a big part of the advisor-client relationship. So just, I think backing up from what's available out there in the marketplace, advisors can decide, I want this to be my point of differentiation, or I want this phase to be a part of my differentiation. And I think that is a key part of the process and a key part of what people need to keep their focus on, because that is the North Star for the industry, is that humans add value where the humans add value.
That makes a lot of sense. It's going to bubble up. It's going to be really good at certain things, and it's going to bubble up the things where humans can be in the spotlight, and we need to lean into that as well on both of those things. So I love it. I love it. Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you. I really enjoyed being here.
All right. Have a good day there.